Welcome to Void Case Files. Before we dive into tonight's story, I need your help. We're building something special here, a community that refuses to look away from the unexplained. If these stories speak to you, hit that subscribe button. We're aiming for 10,000 subscribers by the end of 2026, and we're committed to bringing you daily videos, daily encounters with the unknown. Your support keeps us diving deeper. Now, let's begin. They say I'm an ex-cop who takes any job, no matter how strange. But this one left a mark. Protecting a frozen, unknown entity in a cryogenic chamber, I felt its presence, its silent influence, even through the glass. This isn't just a story about a weird gig. It's about what happens when something from the deepest trenches of the ocean whispers from its frozen prison. My name is Ethan Kellerman, and 18 months ago, I walked away from Seattle PD with my badge, my service weapon, and a head full of questions I couldn't ask out loud. I was a good detective. Clearance rates that made the brass happy, commendations, the kind of career trajectory that should have ended with a lieutenant's bar and a decent pension. But there was this case, this biotech firm called Helix Genomics, and when I went in to investigate missing research subjects, what I found made me realize some doors shouldn't be opened. Empty beds with restraint marks still visible on the rails. Falsified records that disappeared from the system the moment I tried to copy them. Security footage that cut out at exactly the wrong moments. Always the same 12-minute gap. And the smell. God, that smell of industrial cleaner trying to hide something organic. Something wrong. Something that had soaked into the concrete itself. I filed my report. 3 people above me signed off on it. 2 weeks later, it was gone from the system like it never existed. I turned in my resignation the next day. Now I work private security through an intermediary agency. The jobs nobody else wants. I've spent nights in abandoned research stations where the previous tenants left in such a hurry they didn't bother turning off the lights. Done week-long shifts at a veterinary research centre where all the animals had been euthanized, but the building still needed monitoring for reasons nobody would explain. The pay is decent when it comes, and I don't ask questions I don't want answered. I live in a cramped apartment in Tacoma now, drink too much coffee, sleep too little, and have a growing collection of experiences I can't talk about even if I wanted to. It was a Wednesday morning, November 15th, when my handler called. Teresa Kovac. We'd worked together for about 8 months by then. Former military, the kind of person who gives you exactly the information you need and not one word more. Got something for you, she said, without preamble. Client is Deepwater Biological Acquisitions, 72-hour solo security detail, remote location, 18,000. I was on my 3rd cup of coffee, staring at a stack of overdue bills that had started to feel like a personal attack. 18,000 was triple my usual rate. What's the catch, I asked, already knowing there had to be one. Specimen observation, environmental monitoring. You'll be watching a preservation facility, making sure nothing changes. Temperature checks, log readings. What kind of specimen? There was a pause, just half a second, but with Teresa that meant something. The kind that requires constant monitoring, she said. Look, Ethan, the money's good, but if you're not interested, I'm interested. I was 3 months behind on rent. My car was making a noise that mechanics describe with words like expensive and immediate attention. Where is it? Olympic Peninsula. I'm sending you coordinates now. Client wants you on site by tomorrow afternoon. The coordinates arrived in my email 10 minutes later, and when I pulled them up on my phone and zoomed in on the map, I felt that familiar twist in my gut that always preceded the weird jobs. The location was 2.5 hours from the nearest town, buried in the coastal wilderness of Olympic National Forest. I should have said no right then, but I didn't. I never did. Thursday afternoon, 1:30 p.m., I was driving through terrain that got progressively more isolated with every mile. Olympic National Forest gave way to old-growth timber, massive Douglas firs and western red cedars that blocked out most of the daylight and made the afternoon feel like dusk. Then the landscape shifted to rocky coastal terrain, the kind that looks beautiful in photographs and feels oppressive when you're actually there. The paved road became gravel, then barely maintained tyre tracks that tested my suspension and made me grateful I'd filled up on gas in the last town. My GPS signal failed 30 minutes before I reached the destination, leaving me with printed directions and an increasingly uneasy feeling. fog rolled in from the Pacific, thick and cold, carrying the smell of salt and rotting kelp. I could hear waves crashing against rocks somewhere to my left, a constant rhythmic thunder that seemed to match my heartbeat. Then I saw it through the fog, a concrete bunker built directly into a seaside cliff, half buried in rock like it had grown there. Reinforced walls, no windows, a single rusted metal door with a designation stenciled on it in faded paint. DBAS-7. I parked next to the only other vehicle there, a mud-splattered SUV that looked like it had seen better days. As I got out, the metal door opened and a man emerged. Late 60s, gaunt to the point of looking ill, with hands that trembled as he checked his watch for what I suspected was the 100th time in the last hour. "Kellerman?" he asked, his voice rough like he hadn't spoken to anyone in days. "That's me. You must be Dr. Holt." "Leonard Holt, yes." He looked past me, scanning the tree line like he expected something to emerge from the woods. His eyes had that hollow, haunted quality I'd seen before on trauma victims, on people who'd witnessed something they couldn't unsee and couldn't forget. "Let's make this quick. I need to be gone before dark." Inside, the facility was exactly what you'd expect from a government-contracted research station, utilitarian and cold, built for function rather than comfort. The air smelled like concrete and recycled ventilation, with an underlying chemical smell I couldn't quite place. Holt moved through the orientation like he was reading from a script he'd memorized, his words coming fast and clipped, stumbling occasionally like his brain was moving faster than his mouth could keep up. 3 levels, he said, gesturing to a schematic on the wall that showed the facility's layout. Ground floor, monitoring station, living quarters. Sub-level 1, equipment and storage. Sub-level 2, containment. Containment for what? I asked, though I suspected he wouldn't give me a straight answer. Holt's hands clenched into fists, then relaxed, then clenched again. A specimen, single organism, cryogenically preserved. Your job is simple. Monitor the cryo chamber every 2 hours. Document temperature readings. Ensure containment integrity stays above 98%. He handed me a laminated card with emergency protocols printed in small, dense text. If temperature rises above -300 degrees Fahrenheit, or if integrity drops below 95%, you call this number immediately and evacuate. What happens if I don't evacuate? You call the number and evacuate, Holt repeated, not answering my actual question. I looked at the emergency protocols more carefully. There were notes about psychological effects and proximity exposure, warnings about limiting direct observation time. One line stood out, printed in red. Limit time in sub-level 2 to under 10 minutes per visit. Mandatory. "Dr. Holt," I said, looking up from the card. "What exactly am I guarding?" He stopped moving for the first time since I'd arrived, finally looked directly at me with those haunted eyes. "We recovered it from the Mariana Trench," he said quietly. 31,000 feet down, in a chemosynthetic vent community. It was dormant when we found it. We thought it was dead. He swallowed hard. We were wrong about that. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Outside, the fog pressed against the building like something trying to get in. "What is it?" I asked. "Something that shouldn't exist," Holt said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something that's been down there for we don't know how long. Thousands of years. Maybe longer. Maybe since before." He didn't finish the sentence, didn't explain what before meant, and somehow that was worse than any answer he could have given me. He handed me an access card and a tablet computer, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped both. "Everything you need is on here. Monitoring interface, research logs, partial ones anyway. Most of the documentation is classified above your clearance level." He checked his watch again, and I could see the desperation in the gesture. "I need to go. My replacement was supposed to be here 6 hours ago, but you're here now, so that's fine, that works." "Wait," I called after him as he moved toward the door. "Is there anything else I should know?" He paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the grey afternoon light, and for a moment I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, without turning around, "Don't spend too much time down there. Don't let it get into your head." Before I could ask what that meant, he was gone, almost running to his vehicle. I watched through the doorway as his SUV disappeared into the fog, taillights fading like dying embers, and then I was alone. I spent the next hour familiarizing myself with the facility, trying to shake the unease that Holt's departure had left behind. The ground floor was sparse, almost aggressively minimal. A break room with a mini fridge that hummed loudly, a microwave that looked like it was from the 90s, and a coffee maker that I immediately tested and found to my relief was functional. The bathroom had industrial fixtures and fluorescent lighting that flickered occasionally. And then there was the monitoring station, a desk with multiple screens showing different angles of what I assumed was sub-level 2. I sat down at the desk and studied the monitors. The screens showed a large circular chamber, clinical white walls, and in the center a cylindrical structure about 9 feet tall. The cryo chamber. Even on the low-resolution security feed I could see frost coating the glass, and through it a dark silhouette, vaguely humanoid. I zoomed in one of the cameras trying to get a better look, but the frost obscured any detail. Probably for the best, I thought. The descent to sub-level 1 was via a reinforced stairwell, the kind with thick handrails and non-slip treading that told you this facility had been built to serious safety specifications. The temperature dropped noticeably as I went down, enough that I could see my breath misting in front of me. Sub-level 1 housed storage lockers, backup generators that thrummed with a low, steady rhythm, and large nitrogen tanks with warning labels about pressure and temperature. Everything was clean, well-maintained, but there was something about the space that felt wrong. It took me a moment to realize what it was. There were no personal touches, no forgotten coffee cups, no taped-up photos, no evidence that people actually worked here. It was sterile in a way that suggested either obsessive protocols or rapid abandonment. Access to sub-level 2 required both the keycard and a biometric scan. I pressed my thumb to the scanner, heard a heavy lock disengage with a chunk that I felt through the floor, and pulled open the door. The cold hit me immediately, not like opening a freezer, but like stepping into one. The kind of cold that goes through your clothes instantly and settles into your bones. My breath came out in thick clouds of vapor. The chamber was exactly as it appeared on the monitors, circular, maybe 40 feet in diameter, with the cryo unit standing in the center, like some kind of technological monument. I approached slowly, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The humming of machinery filled the air, a constant low vibration that I could feel in my chest, in my teeth, in my bones. Digital displays showed readings I only partially understood. Negative 324 degrees Fahrenheit, 99% containment integrity. Various other metrics involving pressure and power consumption that meant nothing to me. Through the frosted glass, I could make out a shape. Vaguely humanoid, but the proportions were wrong. Too tall, limbs too long. The frost obscured any real detail, and I found that oddly comforting. I didn't particularly want to see what was inside. I completed my first check, noted the readings on the tablet, and got out of there. The whole inspection took less than 5 minutes, but I felt uneasy in a way I couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear, exactly. More like awareness, like standing in an empty room and suddenly knowing you're not alone, even though you can't see or hear anything to confirm it. Just a primitive part of your brain insisting that something is watching you. Back on the ground floor, I settled into the monitoring station and pulled up the research logs on the tablet. It was 5:45 p.m. The sun would be setting soon, though I doubted I'd see much of it through the fog. I had 67 hours left on this job. Most of the documentation was heavily redacted, entire paragraphs blacked out, but there was enough to piece together a basic timeline. Specimen recovered July 2024, Mariana Trench, depth 9,533 meters, located within recently discovered tubeworm colony. Initial assessment, deceased organism, extreme pressure adaptation. Preliminary classification, unknown phylum. Cryopreservation initiated for transport and study. I knew a little about the Mariana Trench from documentaries. From random articles I'd read during slow nights. Deepest point in the world's oceans. The pressure down there would crush a human being instantly, turn you into paste before you even knew what was happening. But life still existed at those depths. Strange, alien life that had adapted to conditions we could barely comprehend. I'd seen pictures of the creatures that lived down there. Fish with bioluminescent lures, amphipods the size of your hand, things that looked like they belonged on another planet. Another log entry, dated 3 weeks ago, caught my attention. Specimen shows unexpected biosignatures, minimal metabolic activity detected despite cryopreservation. Electromagnetic fluctuations in surrounding environment. Recommend increased monitoring and staff rotation protocols. Staff rotation. That explained why Holt had seemed so desperate to leave. There were references to test subjects and psychological monitoring scattered throughout the logs, but no details about what that actually meant. One phrase appeared multiple times, always in the context of observed effects. Psychic resonance. It was never defined, never explained, just noted as a side effect of prolonged exposure to the specimen. I was making coffee when I first felt it. 8:23 p.m, according to the clock on the microwave. Felt isn't quite the right word, though. It was like hearing a sound that wasn't there, experiencing a frequency just below the range of normal perception. A pressure behind my eyes, rhythmic, like a pulse, but not my pulse. I set down my coffee mug, the ceramic clicking against the counter, and checked the monitors. All the camera feeds showed normal readings. Nothing had changed in sublevel 2. The cryo chamber looked exactly as it had during my inspection. But the sensation persisted, growing stronger. I grabbed the tablet and went down to check in person, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Through sublevel 1, where the generators seemed louder than before, into sublevel 2, where my breath came out in thick clouds and the cold made my eyes water. Standing in front of the chamber, the sensation grew exponentially stronger. It wasn't a sound, it was presence, pure awareness, like standing outside at night and knowing, absolutely knowing, that something is watching you from the darkness even though you can't see it, can't hear it, can't prove it exists. The silhouette inside hadn't moved. The frost patterns on the glass were unchanged, but I felt observed in a way that made my skin crawl and my fight or flight instinct scream at me to run. I checked the temperature reading, forcing myself to focus on something concrete. Negative 323.4 degrees Fahrenheit. That was 0.6 degrees warmer than the baseline reading. Still well within safety parameters, but it was an increase. I noted it in the log, took one last look at the chamber and forced myself to walk, not run, back upstairs. The feeling didn't leave though, even back on the ground floor. Even with 2 levels of concrete and steel between me and sublevel 2, I felt that awareness, that presence. I tried to distract myself, going through all the usual routines. Checked my phone, no signal, as expected. Scrolled through the limited information on the tablet. Made another cup of coffee that went cold while I sat there trying to convince myself everything was fine. At 11:47 p.m, exhausted from the drive and the stress and the constant low-level anxiety, I finally let myself rest. Not sleep, I told myself. Just rest. Close my eyes for a few minutes. I sat in the chair at the monitoring station and immediately fell into something that definitely wasn't normal sleep. I was underwater, but I wasn't drowning. Somehow able to withstand the pressure and the absence of air, my body adapting in ways that should have been impossible. Absolute darkness surrounded me, the kind of complete black you never experience on the surface, where there's always some light, always some ambient glow. No moon, no stars, no light pollution, just void. I was descending, falling through the water column, deeper and deeper. I could feel the pressure increasing, crushing tons per square inch, but somehow I remained intact. Bioluminescent creatures drifted past me like living stars. Jellyfish with trailing tentacles that glowed blue-green. Fish with lights along their bodies. Patterns that might have been camouflage or communication or something else entirely. Things I didn't have names for. Things that probably didn't have names. Drifting through the darkness with their own internal illumination. I kept falling into the depths. Past the point where sunlight could penetrate. Past the twilight zone where the last hints of surface light faded away, past the midnight zone, into the Haddle zone, the deepest parts of the ocean, named after Hades itself, named after the underworld. And there, At impossible depths, something moved. Something large, gliding through the darkness, with purpose and intelligence. It wasn't swimming. The motion was wrong for that. Too smooth, too controlled. It was moving through water the way thought moves through a mind. Effortless, intentional, aware. It was aware of me, watching me with senses I couldn't understand. And I knew, in that dream logic way where you just know things without being told, that I was seeing something ancient, something that had been in those depths since before humanity evolved, before the continents took their current shapes, before the surface world as we know it existed. This thing had been down there in the crushing dark, living and thinking and existing on timescales I couldn't comprehend. I woke with a gasp, my heart hammering, my shirt soaked with sweat despite the cold facility. 12:19 a.m. I'd been out for barely half an hour, but it felt like I'd been gone for days. The monitors showed no changes, everything in sub-level 2 looked normal. But when I pulled up the live feed and zoomed in on the cryo chamber, I could see something that definitely hadn't been there before. Condensation on the glass. Fresh beads of moisture running down the surface in slow rivulets. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screens, trying to convince myself it meant nothing. Condensation in a cold environment. Perfectly normal. Temperature differentials creating moisture. Basic physics. But I didn't believe it, and I knew I was lying to myself. Friday morning arrived grey and cold, and I hadn't really slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that underwater darkness, feeling something massive and aware circling in the depths. At 6:15 a.m., I made coffee and reviewed the overnight footage, scrubbing through the timeline looking for I don't know what. Movement, changes, something to explain the unease that had settled into my bones. What I found was worse than something visible. I found gaps. The timestamp would jump, 4 seconds here, 7 seconds there. Small enough that you might miss them if you weren't looking carefully, but they were there, scattered throughout the night like missing frames in old film. Missing moments. Technical glitch, I told myself. The facility was old, the equipment older. Video systems malfunction all the time. But I went back to the research logs, reading more carefully this time, and found an entry I'd skipped over the night before. Staff rotation every 72 hours mandatory. Extended exposure correlates with psychological effects. Vivid dreams, sense of presence, auditory hallucinations, temporal disorientation. Mechanism unknown. Current hypothesis suggests electromagnetic interference with neural function. Recommend limiting direct exposure and maintaining strict rotation schedule. Temporal disorientation. Missing time. Was that what the gaps in the footage represented? Not technical failure, but something else. Something affecting my perception. I did my second inspection at 10:30 a.m., 42 hours into the job with 30 left to go. The condensation on the cryo chamber glass had formed distinct patterns now, circular formations radiating outward from a central point. Not the random crystallization you'd expect from temperature differentials. These looked deliberate, intentional, like something had traced them from the inside. I reached out and wiped my hand across the glass, clearing the patterns. My hand came away wet and so cold it burned. I watched from near the door, timing it. 5 minutes later, the patterns reformed, circles within circles spreading outward like ripples on water, like something was breathing against the glass from inside. The temperature reading had increased again, negative 321.8 degrees Fahrenheit, still within parameters, but the trend was clear and undeniable. Whatever was inside was getting warmer. I should have called the emergency number right then. Should have evacuated, let someone else deal with this, walked away from the $18,000 and kept my sanity intact. But I didn't. That curiosity I'd felt the night before was stronger now, more insistent. I wanted to understand. Needed to understand. And that should have been my first warning that something was wrong with me, that I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. I lost time again that afternoon. One moment I was sitting at the monitoring station, eating a protein bar and reviewing the logs, trying to find more information about the test subjects, and the next moment I was standing in sub-level 2 with no memory of the transition, no memory of making the decision to go down there, No memory of walking through sublevel 1. No memory of using my access card. Just a gap, like someone had cut those minutes out of my life. 2:47 p.m. according to my watch. The last time I checked, it had been 2:15. 32 minutes gone. I was standing directly in front of the cryo chamber. My right hand was pressed flat against the frosted glass. The cold burned, intense and painful, but I didn't register it until I became consciously aware of where I was and what I was doing. I jerked my hand back like I'd touched a hot stove. My palm print was clearly visible in the frost, slowly fading as condensation reformed over it. And underneath, from inside the chamber, was another handprint, perfectly aligned with mine, as if something inside had pressed its hand against the glass at the exact spot where mine had been, matching my position perfectly. But the handprint was wrong. The fingers were too long, too thin, like spider legs, and there were joints, segments in places where human fingers don't bend. The palm was wider, the proportions alien. I stumbled backward, my breath coming fast, and panicked, and watched as the handprint from inside began to fade. Fresh frost formed over it, obscuring it, but I'd seen it. I knew what I'd seen. Something in there had touched back. I got out of sublevel 2 as fast as I could, practically running up the stairs, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Back in the monitoring station, I tried calling the emergency number with shaking hands. It rang, and rang, and rang. No voicemail, no answer, just an endless ringing tone that seemed to mock me. I tried Teresa. Straight to voicemail, her voice professional and distant. My cell phone still had no signal. The facility landline, connected to the same number as the emergency line, just kept ringing into the void like I was calling a number that didn't exist anymore, that maybe had never existed. I pulled up the contract on the tablet, reading through the terms I'd barely glanced at before. 72 hours must remain on site unless emergency evacuation is required. I was barely 30 hours in. Could I leave? Technically, yes. I could walk out that door right now, get in my car, drive away from this place and never look back. The money wasn't worth this. Nothing was worth this. But I didn't move. Something kept me there, and it wasn't fear of breaking the contract or concern about the payment. It was something else. A pull, like gravity, like magnetism, an attraction that felt foreign, like it wasn't entirely coming from my own mind, like someone else's desire, wearing my thoughts as a disguise. I wanted to see what was in that chamber. I needed to know, and the intensity of that need scared me more than anything else that had happened. At 4:52 p.m., still shaken from the handprint incident, still trying to process what it meant, I experienced something that shattered any remaining illusion of normalcy. I was at the monitoring station, trying to make notes, trying to document what was happening in some coherent way, when the facility around me just changed, not slowly, not like a fade or a transition. One moment I was there, in the present, and the next I was somewhere else. I was still in sublevel 2, but it was different. The room was full of people, 8, maybe 10 of them, all wearing hazmat suits, the kind with full hoods and external air supplies. They were gathered around something on an examination table, not the cryo unit. The specimen itself, before containment, before preservation. It was organic, undeniably alive, though unconscious or dormant. The body structure was vaguely humanoid, head, torso, 4 limbs, but that's where any similarity to humanity ended and something else began. The skin had a pale, almost luminescent quality, like deep-sea creatures I'd seen in documentaries, like things that lived where sunlight never reached and had evolved their own ways of creating light. Bioluminescent. The limbs were elongated, too many joints, segments that bent at angles that made my eyes hurt to follow. The hands, if you could call them that, had long, segmented fingers that seemed to continue past where fingers should end, tapering to points that might have been claws or sensory organs or something I didn't have words for. The head was larger than a human's. The proportions shifted in subtle ways that made it deeply unsettling to look at directly. I couldn't see the face clearly from my angle, but I could see enough to know it was wrong. As I watched, frozen in this vision, Unable to move or speak or do anything but observe, one of the scientists removed his helmet. I don't know why. Maybe he was overheated. Maybe he wanted a clearer look at the specimen. Maybe something made him do it, compelled him. The moment the helmet came off, he screamed. Not a shout of surprise, not a yell of alarm, but a visceral shriek of absolute terror and agony, the kind of sound you can't fake, can't control. He clawed at his eyes, his fingers digging into the skin around his sockets, drawing blood. His fingers actually penetrated, going deeper than should have been possible, and blood streamed down his face as the other scientists tried to restrain him, to stop him from harming himself, but he was fighting with the strength of pure panic. Then the vision ended. I was on the floor of the monitoring station, my nose bleeding, copper taste in my mouth, my head pounding like someone had hit me with a hammer. I checked my watch with trembling hands. 5:29 p.m. 37 minutes had passed. I'd lost more time. I cleaned the blood from my face and pulled up the research logs again, searching desperately for anything about visions, about what I'd just experienced. Found references to shared perception events and temporal echo phenomena, but no explanation of what those terms actually meant, no context that would help me understand. I found the locked storage room on sublevel 1 that evening, driven by a need to understand what was happening to me, what this thing was. The door had a standard key lock, old-fashioned, probably original to the facility. After 10 minutes of work with a paperclip from the break room, the kind of lock-picking I'd learned early in my career and never quite forgotten, I got it open. Inside were boxes, dozens of them, stacked floor to ceiling. Physical files, the old-fashioned kind, maintained alongside the digital records as backup or for security reasons, or maybe just because bureaucracy loves redundancy. I started reading, pulling out documents at random, piecing together information that was clearly never meant to be all in one place. The specimen had a designation, Hadal Sigma, recovered from the Mariana Trench in July 2024 during a deep-sea expedition conducted by the Chinese submersible Fenduje. The recovery location was specific, 9,533 meters depth, in what the reports described as a newly discovered chemosynthetic community. I knew about those discoveries. I'd read articles about them. Scientists had recently found thriving ecosystems at depths of over 31,000 feet, communities of tube worms and mollusks living in total darkness, sustained not by sunlight, but by chemicals seeping through cracks in the seafloor. Methane and hydrogen sulfide converted by bacteria into energy. Life based on chemosynthesis instead of photosynthesis. An entire ecosystem operating on completely different principles than the surface world. Proof that life could exist in conditions we'd thought impossible. The specimen had been found among those communities, but the initial reports were very clear. It wasn't part of that ecosystem. It was something else, something unique, something that didn't fit into any known classification system. Initial analysis indicated unprecedented neurological complexity. The brain structure, if it could be called a brain, was unlike anything in known biology. There were references to unexplained electromagnetic signatures that manifested whenever the specimen was under observation, fields that interfered with equipment, that caused headaches in observers, that seemed to intensify when people were paying attention to it. Test subjects. That phrase appeared again and again in the documents, always in context that suggested things had gone wrong. Test subjects were exposed to the specimen under controlled conditions at a facility I recognized. Helix genomics, my old case, the missing research subjects. They hadn't been missing, they'd been here, or somewhere like here, being exposed to this thing. The medical reports made for grim reading. Insomnia progressing to complete inability to sleep, paranoia, depression, shared nightmares where multiple subjects reported identical dream content despite being kept separate, and in 2 cases, complete psychological breaks that resulted in self-harm requiring hospitalization. All the test subjects had been part of a study on deep-sea organism interaction, and after a 3-month legal battle that I now understood had been designed to bury the information, all records of that study had been sealed. The subjects had been released from observation, compensated for their participation with money and non-disclosure agreements, and, as far as the official record was concerned, nothing had happened. I thought about my old case, about the empty beds and the falsified records. Those people had been released, paid off, silenced, and I'd been too low on the chain to ever get the real story. The final document I found was a handwritten note from Dr. Leonard Holt, dated yesterday, written in shaky handwriting that deteriorated as the note progressed, becoming almost illegible toward the end. Temperature increase continues despite maximum cooling. Standard containment protocols failing. It's waking up. Metabolic activity increasing. EM signatures getting stronger, affecting equipment, affecting personnel. It's learning to reach beyond the glass, beyond the chamber, beyond the physical constraints we thought would hold it. It's been down there for thousands of years, maybe millions. We don't know what it wants. We don't know what it's capable of. God help whoever they send next. God help them. I put the documents back in their boxes, my hands shaking, closed the storage room, and went upstairs. It was 8:45 p.m., 51 hours into my shift, 21 hours remaining. If I could just make it 21 more hours, I could leave, I could walk away, I could take the money and try to forget this ever happened. The temperature in sublevel 2 had increased to negative 315.2 degrees Fahrenheit when I checked. Containment integrity was at 97%. Both readings were still technically within acceptable parameters, but they were degrading. Slowly, steadily, inexorably, the specimen was getting warmer. I knew I should leave. Every rational part of my brain, every survival instinct I'd developed over years of police work, was screaming at me to get out, to drive away, to let someone else handle this. But I couldn't. That pull was stronger than ever, an almost physical sensation like hooks in my chest drawing me downward, like gravity had reversed itself, and sublevel 2 was the new center of the world. I went down there, unable to stop myself, and the frost on the glass was nearly gone. For the first time, I could see the specimen clearly. It was approximately 7 feet tall, suspended in a clear preservation gel that caught the light strangely. The pale skin had that same bioluminescent quality I'd seen in the vision, though dimmed by the cold and the preservation process, a faint glow like foxfire, like deep-sea creatures that made their own light. The body structure was humanoid, but fundamentally wrong in ways my brain struggled to process. Too many joints in the arms and legs, segments that bent in directions that violated my understanding of anatomy. The hands were the worst. Those long, segmented fingers with too many joints, ending in what might have been claws, or might have been something else entirely, something I didn't have a reference for. The face was partially obscured by strands of the preservation gel and by the angle, turned slightly away from me, but I could see the general shape. Larger skull, different proportions, features that suggested intelligence but not humanity. It was still frozen, still suspended in that gel, still technically dormant according to the readings. But I knew it was aware. I could feel it. It was paying attention to me with the same intensity I was paying attention to it, and that mutual observation created something between us, a connection, a channel. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just watching, waiting for something. Movement, a sign, anything. Nothing visible happened. The specimen remained motionless. The machinery continued its steady hum. The temperature slowly crept upward. But something changed inside my head, like a door opening, like a frequency suddenly coming into range. It didn't speak, not in words, but I understood. Images flooded my mind. Not my own memories, not my own thoughts, but something else's experiences, something else's knowledge, being shared directly with my consciousness without the need for language or explanation. I saw the depths of the ocean, far below where sunlight could ever reach, the Hadal zone where pressure was measured in tons per square inch and darkness was absolute. But there was light down there, bioluminescence from creatures adapted to the crushing deep, and something else. Artificial light, constructed light. I saw vast underwater installations rising from the ocean floor, built from something that looked like stone but couldn't be, material that glowed with its own internal light, pulsing in rhythms that might have been communication or power distribution or something else entirely. Cities, maybe, if you could call them that. Settlements of some kind. Built at depths humans had only reached a handful of times, and then only in specially designed submersibles, built when humanity was still learning to use fire, still figuring out agriculture, still thinking the world was flat. The images came faster, overwhelming, like drinking from a fire hose. I saw civilizations that had existed in the darkness, that had evolved and developed while humanity walked on the surface, completely unaware. I saw technologies based on pressure and chemistry rather than heat and electricity, sciences that had taken completely different paths because the environment demanded different solutions. I saw life that operated on principles alien to surface dwellers, creatures and beings that thought in ways I couldn't comprehend, that experienced reality through senses I didn't have. And I understood what the specimen was offering me: knowledge, understanding of the deep earth, of the ocean trenches that covered more of the planet's surface than land did, secrets that had been hidden in those depths for longer than human civilization had existed, access to information that could reshape everything we thought we knew about life, about evolution, about the history of this planet. All I had to do was raise the temperature, just a few degrees, let it wake up properly, let it emerge from its frozen sleep so it could share more, show me more, teach me more. My hand moved toward the temperature control panel. I watched it happen as if watching someone else, my body acting without conscious input from my mind. My fingers reached for the controls that would override the safety protocols, that would warm the chamber and let the specimen wake. Part of me wanted to do it, wanted desperately to know what would happen, what it would show me, what understanding it would share. The promise was intoxicating, seductive, everything I'd ever wanted as a detective, as someone who needed to understand, who needed answers. But then I thought about the scientist in my vision, the one who'd removed his helmet and immediately started screaming and clawing at his own eyes, who'd seen something that broke him completely. I thought about the test subjects and their psychological deterioration, their shared nightmares, their inability to sleep, their descent into paranoia and self-harm. I thought about Dr. Holt's trembling hands and his desperate need to leave before dark, the way he'd looked at me like I was already dead and just didn't know it yet. This thing didn't want to share knowledge as an equal. It wanted something from me. Maybe it wanted out of that chamber. Maybe it wanted a connection to the surface world, a foothold, a way to extend its influence beyond the glass. Maybe it wanted something I couldn't even understand, something that didn't translate into human concepts. But whatever it wanted, the price wasn't one I could afford to pay. I pulled my hand back from the controls. The images in my mind intensified immediately, becoming demanding rather than offering. The underwater cities, the alien technologies, the promises of understanding, all of it pushed at me with increasing force. The hooks I'd felt in my chest pulled harder, insisting that I comply, that I do what it wanted, that I serve its purpose. I could feel it now, feel the otherness of it, the fundamental alienness. This thing had been down in the crushing dark for so long that it didn't think like surface life anymore, didn't want what surface life wanted. It had adapted to an environment so hostile that it had become hostile itself, optimized for survival in conditions that would kill anything else. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall mount. The presence in my mind went from demanding to frantic, from command to desperation. I raised the extinguisher and brought it down on the temperature control panel as hard as I could, and the metal crunched and sparked under the impact. Alarms blared immediately, a deafening wail that hurt my ears. Emergency lights flashed red throughout Sublevel 2, turning everything the color of blood. The emergency cooling system engaged with a roar of machinery and a blast of vapor from vents I hadn't noticed before, nitrogen flooding the chamber. The temperature display went haywire, numbers dropping precipitously as the emergency protocols took over, interpreting the damaged panel as a catastrophic warming event. Negative 340, negative 360, negative 380. The presence in my mind didn't just fade or withdraw, it screamed. Not a sound, but a sensation, like something being torn out of my consciousness by force, like roots being ripped from soil, like hooks being pulled out of flesh. The pain was intense, blinding, a spike of agony right behind my eyes that dropped me to my knees. Through the pain, through the tears streaming down my face, I saw the cryo chamber frost over completely. Thick layers of ice formed on the glass in seconds, obscuring the specimen, sealing it back in cold so intense that the gel itself began to solidify. The temperature continued to plummet as the emergency system worked to compensate, going far below the normal operating range, ensuring that whatever was in there stayed dormant, stayed frozen, stayed contained. I ran, stumbled up the stairs on legs that barely worked through sublevel 1 where the generators were screaming, back to ground level, grabbed my jacket and my keys and made it to my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The alarms were still blaring from inside the facility as I started the engine and drove away, my headlights cutting through the fog, branches scraping against the car as I navigated the narrow road too fast. I didn't stop until I reached a rest stop near Port Angeles, pulling into a pool of yellow light from a street lamp at 2:13 a.m. I sat there in my car with the engine running, heat blasting, trying to stop shaking, trying to process what had just happened, trying to figure out what to tell Teresa, what to say when she inevitably called. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it for a long moment before answering. Kellerman. It was Teresa. Her voice was calm, professional, exactly as it always was. No concern, no alarm, just business. Status update? There was an incident, I managed. The temperature control panel malfunctioned, emergency protocols engaged. Did you complete your 72 hours? I looked at my watch. 2:17 a.m. Saturday morning. I'd left more than a full day early, abandoned my post, broken the contract. Yes, I lied. Completed the full shift. Everything was normal until the malfunction. Temperature is stable now. There was a pause. In that silence, I wondered if she knew I was lying, if sensors in the facility had already reported my early departure, if there were consequences coming that I couldn't anticipate. Good, Teresa finally said. The payment will be processed. We'll send a repair crew to handle the panel. Thank you for your service. She hung up. Just like that. No questions, no follow-up, no indication that anything unusual had happened. The money appeared in my account the next morning, all $18,000 transferred like clockwork, like I'd completed the job exactly as specified. I never heard from Deepwater Biological Acquisitions again, never received a call about the damaged panel, never got a question about what happened during that shift, never saw any indication that anyone cared. It was like the whole thing had never occurred, except for the money in my account and the memories I couldn't shake, couldn't rationalize, couldn't forget. I used the money to move, got out of Tacoma, relocated to Spokane, started over. Different city, different apartment, different security company. Normal jobs now, corporate buildings with nothing more dangerous than bored night watchmen, residential complexes where the biggest threat was teenagers sneaking into the pool after hours, events that needed extra security, weddings and concerts and conferences. Nothing remote, nothing research-related, nothing that required an NDA. Nothing that made me feel like I was guarding something that shouldn't exist. That was 3 months ago, and I still dream about the depths. Every single night I'm back in that underwater darkness, descending past the point where light can reach, falling through the Hadal zone. And I feel something down there, circling in the crushing deep, watching me, remembering me. Some nights I wake up and my apartment is cold. Not normal cold, not thermostat malfunction cold, but that bone-deep chill I felt in sublevel 2. And when I check the windows, there's frost on the glass. Not random crystallization, not condensation from temperature differentials. Patterns, circles within circles radiating outward, the same formations I saw on the cryo chamber. I know it's still there, in that facility on the Olympic Peninsula, still frozen in its chamber, still waiting. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night, the thing that makes me check the locks twice and sleep with the lights on. I can still feel it. That connection we made when I touched the glass, when it touched back, when it reached into my mind and showed me what was down there. It's still there, faint but present, like a phone line that's been left open, like a channel that was never quite closed. Sometimes in those moments between waking and sleeping, when your defenses are down and your mind is vulnerable, I feel it reaching out, testing the connection, seeing how far it can extend beyond the glass, beyond the facility, beyond the physical distance between us. And I know with absolute certainty that it's learning to reach farther, learning to touch minds across distance, learning to wake up despite the cold that's supposed to keep it dormant. Maybe it's reaching others too, people who've gotten too close, people who've made that same mistake of touching the glass. Maybe there are others like me, scattered across the country, walking around with these hooks in their chests, these channels in their minds, thinking they got away but never really escaping. The Mariana Trench is the deepest point on Earth, 36,000 feet down. You could fit Mount Everest inside it with room to spare, and the peak wouldn't even break the surface. Scientists have discovered thriving ecosystems down there, life sustained by chemicals instead of sunlight, organisms that exist in conditions we once thought impossible for life to survive. But we've explored less than 5% of Earth's oceans. The Hadal zones, those deepest trenches, remain almost completely unknown to us. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the deepest parts of our own ocean. So what else is down there, in the crushing darkness where pressure would kill a human in an instant? What else has been living and building and evolving and thinking while we walked on the surface, completely unaware? What else has been sleeping in the deep, dreaming in the cold and the dark, waiting for the moment when we'd finally reach down far enough to find it? And what happens when we bring it up from those depths, when we try to study it and contain it and understand it, when we expose ourselves to something so fundamentally alien that it doesn't even operate on the same principles as surface life? I don't have answers to those questions. All I know is that something is still down there in that facility, sealed behind glass and ice and steel. And part of me, the part that touched the glass, the part that let it in, is still connected to it, still listening to the whispers from the deep, still feeling those hooks pulling at my chest, gentle but persistent, patient but inevitable. It waited thousands of years in the crushing dark. It can wait a little longer for me. If this case file gave you chills, subscribe to Void Case Files. We're building a community of 10,000 truth seekers by the end of 2026. Daily videos, daily encounters with the unexplained. Tomorrow brings another descent. Until then, stay vigilant.